Hi guys, welcome back to the Adaptive Zone podcast. My name's Matthew Boyd. I'm a physiotherapist, running coach, and the founder of Pinnacle Rehabilitation and Performance, where we help runners overcome their injuries and smash PRs. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like and subscribe. Today we're going to be talking to Brodie Sharpe of the Run Smarter podcast. So Brodie, welcome to the Adaptive Zone.
Thank you very much for having me on, Matthew.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional work?
Excellent. Yes. So I am from Melbourne, Australia, and I, as you said, host the Run Smarter podcast and try to reach as many runners as possible and help trying to educate as many runners as possible, help them run smarter, train smarter, rehab smarter, pretty much very much in line with your podcast already. I started with the Run Smarter podcast and that's still going, and approaching 300 episodes. I have recently started. Yeah. It's been a long undertaking, but yes, going well. Recently started dabbling into YouTube. Got a YouTube channel now, which I'm really enjoying. And as of last year, became an author. Wrote the Run Smarter book, which was an even bigger undertaking, probably bigger than the podcast, but. Just trying to reach as many mediums, as many like different platforms, because I know not every runner listens to podcasts, and some runners like audiobooks, some runners like paperback books, and the visual sort of stuff. And so just my attempt to try and get the right information to as many runners as possible.
It's just for the listener, we're going to be talking today about some of the, common pitfalls of injury recovery, like things that are good, things that are bad, like how you see things, because I think you're quite uniquely positioned to help with that. But I'm curious, just, you have a somewhat non-traditional path there in terms of your, career as a physio. So somewhat selfishly, I'm interested to know, why have you gone for this, really heavy, emphasis on content and producing all this rather excellent free online material? What drew you to that way of, progressing your career?
When I first started producing content, I wanted to do a few things. One, it was going to fall in line with me starting my online physio career. So I wanted to, I was moving away from the clinic that I was working at. I was there for 7 years, really found an interest in running, really loved treating runners, wanted to explore more of that. And one of my colleagues is like, oh, why don't you just do it? Have you ever thought about doing online? And I'm like, well, runners are overloaded injuries. They're sometimes more chronic. I could definitely help in the online telehealth sort of space. So explored that and then thought maybe try in person down the track once the online stuff picks up. Because, online, it's don't really need a lot, not a lot of overheads, not a lot of massive financial commitments or anything like that. So once I sort of dabbled my feet with both and the online stuff started taking off, I'm like, yep, this is the direction I want to head in. So the online content was just, reach as many people as possible, educate them and try to teach them as much as possible. I wasn't going to hold anything back. I thought it was really nice business decision if I was just to teach. If someone wanted to listen to all of my content and learn as much as I know, and they can rehab their own injury without me, then that's one of my goals. But I know that there are a lot of people who try to do the stuff themselves and still need that extra little bit of expertise. And so I positioned myself in a way that if that did ever happen, if someone did learn all the stuff from my content and try it themselves and see some improvement, but still not 100%, I want to be the first person they came to when they needed that one-on-one or that guidance. And so I just thought it was a good business decision rather than just teaching people some things. And if you want to know all the stuff, then work together and kind of have that sort of model, I think doesn't really sit right for me. And so I'm constantly getting people saying, listen to your podcast, you're doing yourself a disservice because I've just, overcome my own shin splints just listening to your podcast and didn't even need you. And so I secretly just give myself a little fist pump there because that's the goal that I'm after.
Yeah, it's awesome. And like you said, 300 podcasts, I've been following your stuff for a while. I know you're active on social media. I was part of an active Facebook group. I think you're still doing that. Then you've got the book and the now YouTube, because apparently, that's not enough, what we just said. So, and it's awesome, man. And it's really been inspiring for me, following a similar path. And I share that same philosophy that if we put as much helpful content out as we can, you're like, we'll be all right. We'll make enough to get by. And then the people who, we might never meet can actually get good quality stuff. Because, I mean, something that bothers me, I'd expect it bothers you, but every time I'm going to do an episode, I Google the question or the topic, and the stuff that comes up is so bad that it just drives me insane. It's so simplistic and unhelpful. It basically just tells you what you could have come up with on your own. And it's like having resources there that actually go into the nuance and also try and draw on the science and interview the experts and the researchers and do all of that it's just so helpful for people who are, stuck with running injuries.
For sure. Yeah. I think, I've stopped Googling stuff. I've even stopped, trying to help it. Like, obviously in my own Facebook group, I spend a lot of time there, but, I used to be in other running Facebook groups and try to see what questions people are asking, what issues they have, what frustrations and pain points and all that sort of stuff, just for ideas of trying to get myself in the mind of, everyday runners. And I just found myself just getting frustrated. And I'm like, it's not good for my peace of mind or my mindset looking at all these things and just scrolling through and getting frustrated, especially all the advice. Like, it's fine to ask questions, but the advice that they get, I'm like, no. And I had to stop. I'm just like, it's not doing well for me. I'm trying to help people, but just stick to my content and podcasts and that sort of stuff, and have a better peace of mind that way.
Well, no, I mean, that's what I wanted to talk about today, actually, is these, common misconceptions and things that we might touch on that are maybe not quite right, but very prevalent, and some of the ways that rehab or running injuries are not, managed as well as they could be. And it's very much the norm, I would say, rather than the exception. And, the idea came, I was listening to one of your podcasts. I think you were reviewing an article, I think it might have been by Jill Cook. And she was talking about like the differences. It was like what not to do for tendon rehab or something like that. And, there was a lot of stuff. There was a lot of like, this is what happens most of the time. And it's not ideal, really.
Yeah, a lot of misconceptions. And that's why it's funny that, running injuries are so prevalent. So many runners get injured. Like, I know you've just recently had ITB syndrome. I think my last running related injury was, I've been through it all. I haven't had a major disruption in my running for a very long time, but, when I was first running the first 5 years, I was just going string of injuries, just knee pain,
you had the hamstring
calf pain,
tendinopathy, didn't you?
Hamstring tendinopathy for a long time.
Yeah.
I had a pes anserine tendon for multiple years, and then you go looking for answers, and you just can't find any. You can't find real good, effective stuff. It's all pretty muddied, and unfortunately, people go to health professionals as well, and sometimes they miss the mark. Runners think they're doing the right thing, contacting a professional, and not all professionals know exactly what to do or how to effectively treat it. They say, just rest for a couple of weeks and start some glute bridges, and it's really poor advice, and unfortunately that's the world we live in.
Okay, well, let's start there. Let's get into it. So for you, what are the most common reasons that runners do get injured? Like, why do you think you got injured? I had a similar story. First, I'd say 5 years of running, like injury after injury. Like, what do we do wrong? Why does this happen?
Yep. You can boil most of it down to, it's called load versus capacity, which most people are familiar with. So the load side of things would be your training loads, how far you're running, how fast you're running, what your terrain is like, your transition in shoes, like all those sorts of things that just change how much force is put through your body. And a lot of runners underestimate how much load actually goes through your body when you train. And, you can look at studies and say like 2 to 3 times your body weight goes through your knee every step that you take. How hard your calf muscles work, your soleus, which is a part of your calf, 6 to 8 times your body weight when you have to push off. These are enormous loads, and your body needs to tolerate that. So that's where it comes to the capacity side of things. So we just want to make sure that your capacity to tolerate the training loads are well balanced. And there are a few other little things that do influence that load versus capacity. So your recovery, how much sleep you're getting, your stress, your sleep, your nutrition, hydration, all that sort of stuff. Like that all factors in. But boiling it down to like a simplistic answer, most runners are getting injured because they're exceeding their capacity. They're doing too much too soon. They're ill prepared for the races that they train for, or they're introducing speed too quickly, or they're even just like outside of running. If they go to a gym class, or if they take up cycling, if they want to go skiing and they do too much, that's where people are prone to getting these overuse injuries. And that's where we see most of our running related injuries. When we talk to injured runners, it's you can clearly see there's something in their history that is leading to that overload.
Yeah, you mentioned the capacity to tolerate that load, which I suppose it would make sense in your story and mine and many others that I've heard, that if you're getting into running the first few years, you just have less capacity because you haven't done as much of it. So your body's not as able to tolerate those specific stresses. And until you build that capacity, you're more vulnerable. And you might be lucky and not have any, or you might be unlucky and have a budge.
Yeah. I'd say as well, like when you're as a beginner runner, most people, yes, we're not conditioned for that repetition and those ground reaction forces and those sorts of things. But in my case, I was just running too fast every single run. I didn't know how to run slow. I didn't know anything about intensity distribution. I didn't know much about rest days or paying attention to my body, or, paying attention to symptoms, like all those sorts of things you sort of learn along the way. And, some people go years without learning how to run slow. They think they're running slow, but they're really not. And so, a lot of lessons to be learnt there.
And so if you were to go back in time and you were starting over, is that what you would have focused on, like speed distribution, or would it be something else? Like, what do you think you could have done to have a happier time as you first got into running?
I think probably getting off Strava. I picked up Strava, and my mates are on Strava, and I'm like, they're giving me like a kudos every time I like got a PB, or every time I like did my longest run and all that sort of stuff. And I was just compelled to, want to better myself, want to run further, run faster every time. Every run needed to be like close to my PB, or like challenge myself. And was just looking at that really short game, just being excited about making gains, being excited about the improvements I was making physically, but not looking at the long game, because if you continue down that path, you're just going to run into a string of injuries straight away. So to answer your question, yes, intensity distribution, I'd probably learn to run slow, back off the intensity. And so when it's time for those occasional faster sessions, I was more fresh and could tolerate it better.
And how long, I don't know if this is a question that could be answered, but how long do you think people need to spend getting used to running slower before they add faster work? Or do you think they can do it straight away? They just have to do like a little bit.
Yeah,
sorry, my
depends
dog's
on
under the chair here and barking
that's
at
okay.
me.
I've got my dog sleeping beside me as well. Hopefully she behaves. I would say it depends on your fitness history. Like, everyone gets into running with a different fitness history. Some people are gym goers for years and then they decide to take on running. Some are like cyclists, take on running. Like in my case, I had a long history of playing basketball and then got into running. And so everyone has different things. I'd say I was equipped for speed. I'd say I was equipped for the faster stuff, being like basketball, short sprints, all that sort of stuff, explosive, jumping, landing, changing direction. But I just probably wasn't equipped for the slow, long run. That's probably what was my sort of weak link. Whereas someone, if they are into endurance sports, they might be straight away into the long stuff, but really struggle with hills or really struggle with speed work. So it really depends. A lot of recreational runners starting from scratch, I would say they probably can't go straight into speed work. I'd say, build up your continuous running till you're about 40 minutes of continuous running, of slow continuous running. Once you can tolerate that, then you can start sprinkling in some speed work. Usually start with strides at the end of a session and then take it from there.
And do you think that, runners should steer away from races early on, or do you think it's okay to get into it straight away?
Yeah, it depends on the type of runner. Like some runners won't run unless they're motivated preparing for a race. Like they love races and they love, building up towards a race. Some people are just compelled to do that. And if they don't have a race coming up, then they're not going to get out of bed. Their motivation is going to be super low and all that sort of thing. But on the opposite side, like races, I see people wanting to do 2 marathons a year, 3 half marathons, and they just go from race to race and they're just injured race to race because they haven't had the right time to rehab their injuries. And so I have seen both sides of those. It depends on the type of runner. If someone wants to train for a race and they go from race to race injury free, I'd say their approach is appropriate. But for those who are stringing from race to race to race and injured the majority of the time, I'd say, it's time to reshuffle those priorities. And, I have to have some back and forth with a lot of my clients because sometimes I have to tell them, like, let's not do a marathon, let's not do a race in the next 6 months. Let's just focus on rehab because you've been injured for the last 5 years. You want to think a bit more long term. You want to think, marathon in 2 years from now. Do you want to be injured or do you want to be symptom free? And so, it does depend on the runner, their motivations, their injury history, and those sorts of things.
So it sounds like, when the runner comes to you and they are injured, a big part of what you're looking at is the whole background story of how this emerged, in terms of what their background was in terms of sport history, what they've been doing, how fast they're running, what they're training for, that kind of thing. Is that where you place most of your emphasis at first, or are you looking more at, biomechanics and, specific weaknesses or restrictions or anything like that? Like, where do you start when you're looking at an injured runner?
When I start, for my podcast, I offer free injury chats. So people can sign up for 20 minutes. We can just jump on a call and we could just ask questions back and forth and get a bit more insight into their rehab and things that they can work on. So I'm talking to a lot of injured runners over the course of my week. I probably have 20 different conversations with on those injury chats. And so I dive into straight away what their injury history is like. Sometimes they'll fill out a bit of information beforehand, so I've kind of got a bit of information, but it is diving into their history. You can kind of get a general sense of the type of runner they are, and they might be those marathoners who say, I do 50K running a week, I do these amount of marathons per year, these are my PBs. They'll list all that sort of stuff, and they're very goal orientated, very motivated and that sort of stuff, but they're probably, like I was talking about before, just stringing these races together, going from injury to injury. And some people are they've been injured for several years. It's not uncommon for me to see a runner who's had an injury for more than 2 years. And that's, you really need to change something. Something drastically needs to change in order to break that cycle. But to answer your question, yes, I dive into the history. I really emphasize, okay, what was happening around the time of this injury? Could have been 4 weeks ago, but what was happening around that time to put the pieces of the puzzle together? Was it overload? Was it stress? Was it sleep? Was it, just doing something different? We really need to uncover that, because if we can't uncover that reason why, then rehab's a little bit more of a struggle. The advice you give is a bit more hindered or hampered because, you just don't have all those pieces of the puzzle. And, the biomechanics, the strength tests, all those sorts of things, they'll probably come at a later date, but they're not the big rocks we focus on. As physios, we focus on the big rocks first, and then we work our way down to the smaller rocks, the pebbles, the grains of sand, and, the big rocks are your training history. What's gone wrong? Has there been some sort of training overload? Has there been some sort of change in your speed or terrain or shoes or something along those lines? Has there been any change in your recovery or stress? cover those first and then work your way down from there.
And then in terms of getting them back, is there a common, 2 or 3 things that you're always working on with people? Or is it more like does it really depend like what their specific problem is? Or are there commonalities among all the runners you end up working with?
If I was to try and think of commonalities, it's like, okay, what can this injury currently tolerate? If it's running, how much running is it? If it's running, do we need to make some modifications? Do we need to change the speed that they run at? Do we need to change their duration? Do we need to change their shoes? Or, something along those lines. How much can this injury currently tolerate? That's with strength training. That's with cross training. That's with, I see a lot of high hamstring tendinopathy, proximal hamstring tendinopathy, like how much can they sit? Any sort of element that we want to try and grasp, we want to say, okay, how much, what is their capacity? Like we say, it comes to load versus capacity. So trying to establish how much they can currently tolerate. Once we establish that, we then have the training load side of things. Again, load versus capacity. So now we're looking at the load. Let's make sure that we don't exceed that capacity. Let's make sure that we're just under that capacity limit so that the injury stays strong, so that your fitness is preserved, and then we can progress from there. So that if there's one commonality against all of these injured runners, it is just that. Let's try and establish how much your injury can currently tolerate and work up from there.
Absolutely. 100% agree. That's exactly what I do. Like the foundation of everything I'm working on with people is the way I phrase it in my head is, what can they handle right now? Like, what can they handle right now? So you're trying to get a sense of that. And then it's like, how can I move that towards where they want to go? And then the next question is, how long is that going to take? Which involves a bit of projection. But that's essentially it, is balancing the load and capacity is the foundation. Because for me, it doesn't matter if you do everything else right or wrong. If you get that right, then you're sort of starting off on the right foot.
Yeah. And my runners don't realize it until they've had 2 injuries. So like I'll be coaching someone and we'll be working for a couple of weeks and I'll say, okay, this is your progression chart. These are the running modifications. These are your pain rules to see what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And they work through it, they get better. And then all of a sudden, like another injury pops up and I just do the same thing. I'm like, okay, well, this is your progression chart. These are the running modifications. And they're like, oh, so it's exactly the same as my first injury. And I say to them, I wish you were on all of my calls throughout the day because it's essentially the same thing and it works. Like, yes, there are individual circumstances per injury, per person. We do need to factor all that in, but the underlying approach is exactly the same.
Yeah, like you say, it's the big rocks. It's the things that you have to get right with everyone, and then there is nuance to some people. So, you mentioned that what do your athletes, what do they attribute their injuries to typically?
A lot of them have already listened to my podcast and YouTube and that sort of stuff, so they kind of have they're a little bit smarter than most other recreational runners, I'd like to say. But, if I was to go into Facebook groups and other, or if someone's just stumbled upon my podcast, because some people listen to one episode and then book in for an injury chat. Some people think, well, I guess the most common is they know they've done too much too soon. Like, they don't know in the moment, but once they're injured, they're like, okay, I know that was silly. I know I shouldn't have gone from 30 Ks a week to 50 Ks a week. Now, looking back on it now, retrospectively, that was stupid. So I'd say most people have identified retrospectively the errors in their training that they've made. But there are a couple of others. One would be they don't think they stretch enough, or they think their warm-up is inadequate and they probably should prioritize stretching and warm-ups and that sort of stuff, which is a lot less relevant. I have runners being told unfortunately by health professionals, really unhelpful advice. They think they've got one leg longer than the other. They think their pelvis is tilted. They think their spine's out of alignment. They think, they get injured because their glutes aren't firing, or there's one calf tighter than the other, like all these really minute insufficiencies or imbalances and all that sort of stuff. And unfortunately, like, as a physio or as a health professional, if you've got an injured runner that comes in, you want to try and find all the pieces. You want to try and find all the answers, and you get a lot of buy-in and a lot of understanding. If you find, oh, you have one leg longer than the other, this would cause your injury because you're favoring or you're compensating and all those sorts of things. But it's frustrating on my end because I know that it's not a big factor, and I know that it distills a lot of worry, panic, anxiety for the runner, because if you've got a leg length discrepancy, then you can't change that. And once your injury is better, you think that you're running on with a imperfect, defective body, and that's not good for anyone. And so the narrative there that persists beyond the injury is really unhelpful. And so, that's what I try to educate to the runners as much as possible. It's not, if just go down to the load versus capacity. That's the big rocks. I can dive into the leg length discrepancy research and let runners know that it's not much of a worry. But yeah, education is really important.
I mean, it's a key point there, and it certainly gets my goat, and I'm sure it does yours. This emphasis on, I think you call them minute or very small factors like leg length, muscle timing of firing, and these kinds of things. Shoes, I mean, sometimes if the injury's in the foot, it's like, oh, it hurts in these shoes, but not these ones. It's like, okay, fair enough. But so often you see, I mean, I saw a runner at my last marathon by the side, and I went over to ask if she was okay, and she said, oh, I just need to get my glutes firing. And I was like, Jesus, you've stopped in the race. She was obviously having some trouble, but the perception that she needed to activate her glutes and then she would be able to run the last 10 kilometers it's so far from the truth. And that obviously didn't come from her. She's been told that. So it's infuriating, to be honest. Your podcast is one of the it's ubiquitous. And like I was saying about your content, and the reason I like it is because you talk to runners directly, but you're also not peddling this very compelling and interesting and exciting kind of stuff. It's the boring stuff. It's load and capacity. It is slow and steady. It is proper sleep and nutrition. And it's not as easy to sell. It's not as interesting. It's not as exciting.
We're sort of going against the flashy sort of quick fix advertisements, just foam roll 3 times a week, or wear these exciting shoes, or do this exciting massage gun, and the stuff that has a lot of marketing and flashy gimmicks and all that sort of stuff, which is very compelling because a lot of runners want the quick fix. A lot of runners buy into a lot of the narratives and the promises that the advertisers make. But that's why it's one of the reasons why runners are so injured, and why when they are injured, it's so hard to get back to pain-free running. It's because they head down that path. They head down the foam rolling and the kind of the manual therapies a bit too much, and no focus is on the load versus capacity. And so, it is often very frustrating.
Yeah, the analogy I often use is something like weight loss. It's like anything that claims to be acting quickly or some sort of magical shortcut. We instinctively have that kind of skepticism in that world, and we should have the same when it comes to injury rehab. If you're not being told, this is going to take a while, we're talking about transforming your body to adapt so that your capacity meets the load you're placing on it. And that is clearly being wrong because now you're here and you're injured. It's to say that, we're just going to release this or roll this or align this and you'll be up and running again better than before within a couple of weeks we should have that same skepticism, I think, as we would have if someone said, you're just going to take this supplement and you'll lose 10 pounds in the next 2 weeks. But I don't think we do for whatever reason. I think we're more inclined to, and I would say myself included, especially earlier in my career, that, you know, we get sold on these things that sound like that's the key thing. That's the thing I need to do. If I do that, it'll all be better, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, back to your weight loss analogy, if you take a pill and it doesn't work, you try something else. You go, or you could go do, you could try 3 quick weight loss things in a row and they just don't work. You're like, okay, now let's, you know, do something more long term, or let's, like, you know, change priorities. But, you know, again, people don't do that when it comes to injuries. Like, if they're told to foam roll 3 times a week, they'll foam roll 3 times a week for 3 months and still not see any improvement, but are compelled to continue doing it. Stretches and, like, you know, glute bridge exercises. I've had, like I say, I see a lot of proximal hamstring tendinopathy, and I've had people do glute bridges, bodyweight glute bridges for 6 months and not see any difference in their symptoms, yet they still keep doing it because they think it's serving them. And, you know, it's time to change something. If you're not seeing those improvements, you know, we need to, no matter what it is, we need to change something, because you can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different result.
Could you, because I can imagine a runner listening to that and thinking, you know, I'm doing something like that, but then they don't know what they should do. So, like in that example with the bridge and the proximal hamstring tendinopathy, for the listener, is when you get pain, like, just by your sit bone, it's the top of your hamstring. Could you, like, why does that not work? Why is that not a strategy that's going to address that problem?
Well, let's put it this way. It might be the strategy that's working, but something in your whole picture isn't working. So you could be doing the right things, but, you know, maybe you're overstretching, as well as the glute bridges that might be working, but you're also doing something that's unhelpful. Maybe you're running too fast, or you're running too far outside of those glute bridges. But the sort of point I'm getting to is, don't do the same thing expecting a different result if you've gone months without seeing a change. So yes, if all variables are exactly consistent, your mileage, your speed, your whatever, and you know that you can tolerate those, but you're also doing these glute bridges and not seeing any results, then you need to change, you know, those variables. You need, as a runner who is injured and needing to rehab their injury, they need to see steady improvements in the long term. Most of the time I say week by week, but, you know, that's very optimistic for some chronic, stubborn injuries, particularly like chronic tendons and plantar fasciitis. That moves at a snail's pace for chronic plantar fasciitis. But, you know, yes, definitely every month, definitely month by month, no matter how chronic it is, you need to see improvements in that time scale, and somewhere in between. So if you're not, change something. It has to be something in your running, something in your cross training, something in your rehab. Don't expect different results if you don't change.
And I would imagine that you get a lot of people coming to you who've tried rehab, maybe tried it a couple of times and haven't managed to get over their injury. You know, does that happen often to you? And if so, what are the things that you feel has been missing in their rehab that should have been addressed that hasn't been?
It doesn't happen too often, but the first thing I'd go to is, like, correct diagnosis, or, like, if there's a diagnosis that that changes the management. So, like, sometimes someone can have ITB syndrome, think they have patellofemoral pain, so pain around their kneecap at the front of their knee. They think they have that, but in fact it's ITB syndrome. And, you know, there's clear differences between the two, but let's just say they think it's one diagnosis, but it's actually another. You could get better treating it as it's one. And if you treat it like it's patellofemoral pain, and we go back to the load versus capacity, your ITB might get better. Just like, you know, just because you're finding out what it can tolerate, you're building up your tolerance, you're building up your load, and things get better. So that could happen. But there are some diagnoses that you need to change your management. We're going to use this high hamstring again. A lot of people think it's piriformis syndrome, and a lot of people strengthen their glutes. A lot of people do glute stretching and piriformis stretching, and they just don't get better. And then they jump on a chat with me, and I say, you know what, based on your history, based on your symptoms, I don't think it's piriformis syndrome. I actually think it's high hamstring tendinopathy, and let's start treating it as such, and let's see if you start getting better. And they start getting better. And so that sort of, if someone isn't getting better, I would look at a diagnosis. I'd say, okay, maybe there's something that is a different diagnosis that changes the management. But there are a few other things. One would be progressing their rehab. A lot of people, they find initial success with their rehab, but then they just keep doing the same exercises, the same TheraBand exercises for 2-3 months. They saw initial success, so they've bought into the banded exercises, but this is where you need to raise your capacity. You've seen that initial success because you've raised the capacity a little bit, but you need to continue following that trend to reach the demands of what running is. And like we said at the start, people underestimate how bloody hard it is to tolerate the loads of running. And so our rehab needs to reflect that. We need to continue progressing above those banded exercises and get quite strong to meet those demands. So that's another thing. And another one, if someone's continuing to get injured or they constantly have an injury, another thing I'd look at is if they start getting a bit better, are they just jumping back into running too much too quickly? And I said this, I put a whole podcast episode around it, and it was extremely popular, got a lot of feedback, and it was, can't remember the exact title, but it was something along the lines of when getting better is the most dangerous part of your rehab. And it is because I see it so often. People have one good week of rehab, their symptoms have significantly calmed down, and then the next week they're back to high mileage and it goes back to where it was before. And a lot of people are content with that. A lot of people are okay with their pain being around a 1 or a 2 because it's, you can tolerate it. And as soon as it's a 0, they just increase their mileage or speed or whatever, so it's back to a 1 because, or a 2, and just hovering around that. And then just hovers around a 1 or a 2 all the time. If it gets up to a 2 or a 3, then that's a bit too much beyond what they can tolerate. So then they back off their running, they back off their speed, then it gets back to a 0 to 1, and they increase it again. And so it's constantly hovering around a 1 or a 2 for 12 months. And so I like to say with my clients, great, let's continue seeing this steady improvement. Once you are pain-free, that is your new standard. Your new standard is pain-free. If it's anything above that, that means we're exceeding our tolerance and we need to back off. Let's, have better standards for ourselves rather than just hovering around a 1 or a 2.
So it's, first and foremost, if someone's not getting better, you're looking at potentially misdiagnosis. So treating the wrong thing, believing it is something when it's actually something else. And I'll hold my comments on the existence of piriformis syndrome. It must be the most overdiagnosed thing in the whole world.
Sciatica's another one.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a what's the word? We'll not open that can of worms. The second thing you mentioned was that they're not progressive in terms of their rehabilitation. It started well in terms of the capacity was meeting the load and they were doing a bit better because they were doing these banded exercises, but then it stayed there in terms of what they were doing, and then they never got any better. So that then they have a capacity that's like come up a little bit, but not back to the point where they can run, hundreds of kilometers a week. And then the other thing you said was, what was the last thing?
Just
it was
content with hovering around a 1 or a 2. And so as soon as it gets better, as soon as their injury sees significant improvement, they just get straight back into their too much running, too fast. And so then symptoms go back to where they were previously.
So it's not completely resolving the issue, not sort of in a sense finishing your rehabilitation, but getting it maybe 80% of the way there and then not paying it the attention it needs to get it all the way to fully resolved.
Yep. And people are just happy with that. People are happy. Yeah, if I can get through this race preparation and it stays 80% better, then, I'll live with that. And, they just constantly face flare-ups, constantly face like small successes, a lot of failures, but then they see themselves in 6 months and they're exactly where they were 6 months prior.
I think you've given us a really good impression of what you think is important when we look at runners and running injuries, and definitely it's the less sexy stuff, which is right in line with everything I talk about and my guests talk about on this podcast. What do you think, for like takeaways, what do you think gets an excessive amount of attention when it comes to running injuries?
I'd say the flashy, gimmicky stuff that we talked about before.
Right.
Foam rolling can be good for people. I think, you pick your patients sometimes with those. Some people feel great when they foam roll. Some people just feel indifferent. If in terms of like the pure physical benefits, evidence isn't there. But people have good psychological or like emotional recovery kind of benefits. They feel like they're doing something. They get their mental state, calming down so that their body can recover rather than just being in this stress, typed up state the whole entire time. So it can have some psychological benefits on recovery. Stretching as well. People feel good if they attend yoga classes and they feel like they're calming down and their stress levels are calming down. That is good for runners. But in terms of recovery and helping DOMs and improving your injuries and all that sort of stuff, I don't really think stretching's there. Doesn't really meet the mark because it doesn't do anything to load versus capacity. And other things for if your injury is chronic, I think over what's sort of excessive is manual therapy. It's preaching to the choir here. I know we're both online therapists, and I do think that there is a space for hands-on manual therapy. I do think that is the case, but we don't want to become over-reliant on it, especially if your injury is chronic. The longer you've had it for, the less and less relevant that hands-on stuff becomes. And again, doesn't really focus on load versus capacity. So where I sort of position myself for most is the hands-on stuff does really well at settling down your symptoms, calming down your symptoms in the short term. So that then in that short term, you've got a better window to start focusing on the long-term stuff, which is your load versus capacity. So don't go getting 20 shockwave sessions and not seeing any difference. Don't go getting getting massages 3 times a week for 5 weeks and wondering why you're seeing short-term improvements only. But so I'd say most of the time that sort of stuff is excessively looked at.
Yeah, the overarching theme to everything you've said, and especially that last bit, has been, what does this do in terms of load versus capacity? Because if it's not increasing your capacity, then it may help, but it will be in the short term. And if you look at things through that lens, would you say, is that a good way for runners, if they were going to take away like a key point from you today, is that the way they should be looking at what are you doing in terms of addressing your injury, whether you were told to do it or you're just doing it on your own? Does this improve the relationship between load and capacity? Does it increase your capacity in some way?
Exactly, yeah. And if we use, I know I sort of just dipped my toes into the psychological, emotional side of things, but if you're stressed, if you're emotionally stressed, you can't tolerate the same load you once could. Your capacity drops. If your sleep is affected, your capacity drops. You can't tolerate training loads that you once could. So with that in mind, if you get a massage for 60 minutes and you're just like melting into the table and you're like, oh, this feels so good. You feel like really calm. You feel really like centered. You're really unwinding emotionally. Your stress is being relieved. That has real benefits on load versus capacity. But I know a lot of people, they just, think that they get a massage to release trigger points or to increase blood flow or to, lengthen a muscle, and doesn't really do any of that. And they're not really using it for the stress relieving. They're just like, it just feels painful the whole entire time. They're not really that positively affected. And so, yes, these sort of things can really help, but probably not in the way that people think.
So if you were to look at a thing that you're doing as, okay, is this increasing my physical capacity or my mental capacity? You would say that both of those things are good. I realize that they're not it's not a hard line dividing those two, but that if you feel like it's improving your mental capacity, that is going to increase your ability to tolerate the stresses of running as well.
Yeah, especially if your lifestyle is around not a lot of sleep, a lot of stress at work or family dramas and all that sort of stuff. If you're someone who isn't really that affected by stress, gets a lot of sleep, that massage is less relevant because you're already getting the body calming down. You're getting that noradrenaline and cortisol, like all of those sort of things are settling for you to heal and you to adapt and you to tolerate load. And so probably less relevant for those type of people.
I think we're just scratching the surface here, but I want to be respectful of your time, Brodie. I really appreciate you coming on to talk to us. And I'm sure that the listeners have had their interest piqued by what you've talked about today. I'm sure they're keen to learn more. So if they wanted to hear more from you, where would it be best for them to go?
I think most people start with the Run Smarter podcast. Like you said, that this is mainly scratching the surface, but that's why there's 300 podcast episodes. I think there's, it does seem quite overwhelming. So much content, but what I would recommend people do if they do enjoy podcasts, like listening to this one, you can go to the first 10 episodes of my podcast, covers 10 universal principles, mainly revolving around the stuff we've talked about now. So that's a good place to start, and then you can just like scroll through there. And so if you wanted to delve outside of that, like I said earlier, there's the YouTube, there's the book. I have my Facebook group and email list and all that sort of stuff if people are interested. Instagram, I post often there, but I think home base, I think people can learn a lot from the podcast, especially those first 10 episodes, and then just take it from there.
Yeah, when I first started listening to your show, I went back and listened to those. That was a while ago now, maybe a couple of years. But I remember thinking this is an excellent foundation in terms of like just getting what you were talking about today with the big rocks. It's like, what are the big rocks? So people know like how much attention to pay to things. And I think those first episodes did a really good job of explaining that, so that when you do talk about some things on the podcast that are a little bit more the smaller pebbles and the smaller grains of sand, you have that, underlying context to view those with. They're like, yeah, they're relevant, but they're maybe not as relevant as, most of the things that you were talking about today.
Yeah. By design, I constantly refer back to those sorts of things. Like I do have the pain, rest, weakness, downward spiral is an entire episode. And then
that's great. That one.
I just refer people to that and, move on from there. It's like keeping this in mind, let's continue with, the content of today. And so, is a good resource by design to refer people back to.
Yeah, I wish we had more time actually, because I really enjoyed that episode particularly. And I know you've talked about it multiple times. I think it's a really nice framework for people to think about. But I'm going to leave that as a teaser. So ladies and gents, I'll put links in the show notes to all of those content platforms that you mentioned. And then the podcast, as you said, is probably the best place to start. So Brodie, thank you for coming on. That was absolutely wonderful. And really appreciate it.
I loved it, mate. Thanks, Matt.